Hi, everyone. For those of you that I don't know, I'm Lillie. I lead strategic initiatives for Scope 3, which in this context means I lead our AI efforts. And so pleased to be joined by Hugo. Before we jump in, tell us a little bit more about your role at Brandtech.
So I'm Hugo. I'm head of data and technology integrations for the Brandtech Group. I have a marketing technology and analytics background, and at the Brandtech Group, we help companies manage like AI and technology to drive marketing adoption and transformation for their organization.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So Anne mentioned the hype cycle and where we are, and we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about AI. And so from our vantage point, we probably feel like we're a little bit further along. But one of the things that I really ground in is when we think about the early days at Scope 3, we spent a lot of time on education and awareness, thinking about the emissions from advertising and also the simple concept that, not just the size and scale of the problem was important, but also that what was better for the planet was also better for business. And we see AI coming into the fold and really kind of starting to transform the way in which advertising works. Brandtech has been really at the forefront of that. So I'm interested to hear, Hugo, kind of both as you think about the environmental impact of AI, help us ground and what does that really look like, but also, do you also see that really kind of healthy balance in terms of being able to drive outcomes, but that are better for business and the planet?
So the very short answer is you have a direct correlation between how much you're going to pay your hyperscaler for your generative AI and how carbon intensive it is. So the more you pay, usually the larger the model, so the bigger the impact on the planet. The longer answer is we've seen a huge acceleration of how models are built and are running. We've been at the forefront of generative AI since 2018. We've seen the early days of like six-finger people on Midjourney, like GPT-2, GPT-3. Fast forward 2025, every single week, an AI lab is releasing yet another state-of-the-art model that breaks all of the benchmarks. We have GPT 4.5, like Gemini 2.0. I mean, every single lab has a very strong model. The thing is you have three big drivers that have a big impact on how energy and carbon intensive all of those models are. Number one, you have the sheer computing power that is necessary to train them. The rule of thumb to go from like a GPT-4 to a GPT 4.5 is 10x in compute. So every time you have like a new version of a model, you basically multiply the compute by 10 right now with the architectures we have. If you look at Grok 3, which is the latest model created by xAI, allegedly they had 200,000 GPUs in a huge cluster in Tennessee to train that model. So the sheer power needed to train new models have an incredibly high impact on the environment. The second driver is how we are using those models right now in our organization. If you've seen the rise of AI agents and all the promise it has on how it changes marketing organization and agencies, that's great. We all love what it can potentially do. The thing is, we're going to go from one-off utilizations of model to generate one image or one copy or one insight to having hourly or daily workflows that will automate a lot of our mundane tasks. But the thing is, we are going to like keep asking the models to think again. So adoption will go crazy, and we're going to have like much more requirements on the model. So AI agents are great, but they will have a heavy toll on the planet. And the third and final driver is the rise of reasoning model. Until recently, models were still very dumb. So they were trained on a huge computing power. You were asking a question, they would give like an answer on the spot. Tomorrow, with reasoning models, they will take the time to quote unquote think like humans. But technically speaking, it means that they will keep like burning tokens after tokens to get to the right answer. So like the toll on the grid those reasoning models are in huge and much bigger than the traditional LLMs have. So new models, reasoning AI agents, great, but it has a huge impact on the planet. So we absolutely need to have a strong benchmark and a strong way to measure.
Yeah. The size and scale is tremendous, both in terms of the impact that it can have, but also also the way in which we need to think about the second order impacts of the environment. Okay. I think one of the things that's been really interesting to us from an advertising perspective is that, each kind of step in the supply chain, there's different levers that a partner can pull to be able to reduce. And so we spoke about inference and hardware, and inference is the one that we in this room are probably interacting with most as we think about actually prompting AI and getting responses back. But we've actually seen some great scenarios. We worked with a partner that was able to do some hardware migrations. And in addition to being able to reduce their energy and actual financial costs, they were able to reduce their impact from an environmental perspective. They reduced carbon by about 62%, water by about 55%. So again, that virtuous relationship of doing what's best for business, but it's also better for the planet. That is really only possible as we think about having access to numbers. And some of the largest AI model providers don't publish their environmental impact or information about what it actually takes to train. So what role do you think that brands and some of the people in this room play in incentivizing that transparency? And then second part to that question, how do you think developments like DeepSeek kind of drive progress or not?
Well, one of the analytics mantras we always have is you don't optimize what you don't measure, but in the Gen AI world, you don't measure what you don't understand. And very, very few people really understand how those models work, even in the AI labs. But from a brand or agency perspective, it's really tough to help somebody optimize something when you don't truly understand how models are built and how they run. That's why our position is to aggregate multiple models, whether they are closed source, such as like OpenAI or Google, but also open source, such as Llama, Mistral, or DeepSeek. And that's one of the most overlooked impact of the DeepSeek moment. It's one of the first time that, or if not the first time, that an open source model actually beats the state-of-the-art closed source models. The reason we bring open source is because by definition, if it's open source, you can download the model, you can tweak it, you can fine-tune it, and you can really understand how it runs. And that's actually the only way for brands to really understand how much specific use case have in terms of carbon footprint, how they can optimize it, how they can create their own version of the model. So our vision is that increasingly brands will create their own variation of models for use cases that have enough scale and business impact to justify it. Once they have that, they will need partners to just activate against those models. So we want to make sure that you have a bring your own model mentality, the same way you have your bring your own algorithm mentality in programmatic advertising.
Okay, amazing. And I will say, when you don't have that data and transparency, what we've seen is even just asking the question helps to drive things forward, to activate progress and have people start to look into it themselves. Along those lines of kind of having data, visibility, transparency, one of the things that we've done is really kind of built AI measurement into all of our products. And so I'll do just to give kind of a snapshot of being able to start to have a reference point for what is the associated environmental impact of AI use, whether that be a query or other actions. That way people who are not as familiar can really start to understand, even if it's new, and then have baseline measurement and then ways in which they're thinking about optimizing and driving things forward. Okay, so with the explosive growth in AI adoption, but also this really large question of what about the environmental impact, how do you balance this kind of push between larger scale AI deployment to drive revenue and adoption with efficiency and the kind of continued need to be more responsible?
Well, that's a great question. What we have noticed on average in terms of efficiency gains when you use generative AI is around 30 to 60%, depending on the use case. But every single brand we've been working on has seen tremendous efficiency and effectiveness impact using Gen AI. So that's great. So they now want to scale adoption and start building even more creative with generative AI and change all of their product pages with copies generated by LLMs and stuff like that. So to avoid going into a world where everything is created by AI and you have the impact you can imagine on the utility grid, our recommendation is to always balance the use of generative AI with more traditional automation workflows. I can give you just a couple of examples. Think about creative production. Rather than go and use an image or video generation model to create every single creative variant you're going to need in your advertising campaign, you can use generative AI for concepting or for generating a master, and then you leverage blocks or bits and pieces in your creative and add and use traditional creative automation to create thousands of variations. So you generate the background, you generate the hero image, you generate the CTA, you generate the headline with generative AI if you want. From there, you can use like very traditional feed-based system to go from one or two master to thousands of variations. You don't need and you shouldn't use generative AI to create every single variant. Same thing for like copy generation. A lot of our clients want to use generative AI to rewrite product page copies across their entire inventory. So thousands or tens of thousands of product pages. So you can use generative AI to do that, but a better way to do it is to avoid asking the system for like generate or update the ad copy with the exact same instruction over and over again. If you work on a system where you feed the AI with your requirements, how long the copy should be, how many bullet points, what are the retailer's requirements in terms of description length and tone of voice, etc., then you can create, again, like a master copy and scale it very easily. So it's really important to use the AI to get you started, and then you have methodologies to scale without needing a state-of-the-art model again and again and again.
Okay, amazing.
And that's just like one example of how it can look. So you have like prompts, you have like a prompt improvement system as well. That's part of the education piece. It's really important because we are early stage. You need to educate your teams in how to use those systems. Prompt engineering is a skill set that very few people have today for a good reason, because it's very recent. But if you don't optimize your prompt, then you're going to have more tokens going into the system. If you don't control how many tokens you get out, it's going to be more intensive as well. So you have a ton of very basic tips that can help you have a strong impact on how intensive your activity is.
Right. And it seems like there's this, really important kind of distinction as you think about the per unit environmental impact of an action, generating a creative, in relation to what did it take traditionally. If you're saving people flying to a set, or you're able to reduce other parts of the thing of the process, that can be worth the change. But also, so you identify the use cases where AI can have the most impact, and then you're starting to really optimize within that use case. So thinking about what model you're using or prompt engineering to be more efficient from an inference perspective or other parts of that supply chain. And I think that's one of the things that we really focus on as you see on this slide, is finding what are the hot spots, what are the areas that you can start to dig into where you can have the most impact from a reduction perspective to drive that positive change. Okay. And last question, kind of looking ahead, I think we've both been in the advertising technology industry for a long time, and we have a lot of things that we at Scope 3 have been working to improve upon. But what needs to change in terms of how we develop and deploy AI-powered products to ensure that sustainability is really built in from day one? And then what do we need to do to be able to kind of accelerate progress?
So it's really a mix of product functionality and education. I really believe that education is by far the largest driver now. Tell your team not to use deep research to just because they are lazy and they don't want to do their own research. I mean, it can be very convenient to use deep research 10 times a day, and I've done it as well. I mean, I prepared like an RFP document like 2 weeks ago, and I was just lazy, just like ask deep research to do it for me. So that's great. But if you do that 10 times a day, then you start having an impact. So it's really important to start ranking your use cases and also take into consideration what's the impact using an AI can have if you run that all day, every day. But from a product perspective, and that's what we do with our AI platform, we want to make sure that we give end users a way to choose how fast they get the response and how hard the model is going to reason. Now that we have a combination of large and smaller models, reasoning models and non-reasoning models, you can actually choose if you want a very carbon intensive response, because that's a very important critical activity you're asking for. We are also building functionalities in the platform where you can schedule the delivery of your creative overnight, especially if you use an open source fine-tuned model and you decide that you're going to wait until tomorrow morning to get your set of creatives because it's going to be less carbon intensive to run it in a specific location overnight rather than get it immediately at a peak hour. So that's the type of activity we are undertaking.
Okay. So thinking about ways in which we can kind of help users have efficiencies baked into the way in which they're using products. And I think that's consistent with what we've seen of the more you can make the measurement and activation or reduction turnkey, the more likely you drive that adoption and the easier it is to track those results. So that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, this has been a great conversation. I think as we think about the tremendous amount of opportunity that AI presents, we also really need to be thoughtful about thinking about sustainability and really baking that in so that we're not trying to fix problems that we create after the fact. A lot of times the most environmentally responsible action is also performant or the most cost effective as we think about optimization, and that measurement and activation should be a core part of everything that we do as we embed AI in kind of transforming the way in which we do advertising. All right, and with that, I'll invite Anne back up to the stage.